All right, welcome everyone. August 23rd, Manhattan Business Study Hall. Today's topic is data sufficiency, and in particular, the wonderful topic of testing cases. So if you don't know what that means, you soon will. But welcome back. All right, here's a couple of rules for you to know before we get started. Same rules we always go over every time, so you should be accustomed to this by now, but you've got to go through it. So, what kind of problems do you have to submit? Remember, please avoid submitting problems that are too general. We've been getting more of this lately. We've been getting problems that are about the entire GMAT. I mean, one person actually submitted a question that said, please tell me how I can get better at the quant and verbal sections of the GMAT. Which, I feel you, but it's not really a question because you're asking about the entire test all at once. So, you got to give us a question that we can legitimately use in 90 minutes and cover in some sort of meaningful way in that short period. So please watch it there. At the same time, please don't submit things that are too specific. Again, this is the reason why we have a forum. So if you're just going to ask about one problem, then please submit that on the forum. It's actually the purpose of the forums in the first place is for specific questions about particular problems. So unless you've got a theme that you want to submit, please post on the forum. Finally, please don't submit personal issues here. This is not the place for that. In other words, remember there's like 40 people in the live audience and there's several hundred at least who watch the recording. So this is a very large audience type of production. So we don't want to look at one person's personal study plan because that's not a topic that is of interest to the whole crowd here. So please don't submit stuff like, here's my scores and here's my plan and so on and so forth. On our forum, we do have a place for that. We have a folder on the forum called the General Questions folder. It's the very first folder at the top of the forum. And that's where you should put things like study plan questions, individual things, stuff like that. And if it's a question about admissions, I mean, remember that we, at the end of the day, are not an admissions company. We're a GMAT company. So we don't really specialize in admissions, but we do team up with a company that does. That company is called MBA Admission. And they run this Ask an Admissions Consultant folder in our forum. So if you got questions, this is personal questions, this is where they go. As far as stuff that we should get as submissions, intermediate depth, this is the example we've had on here for a while, but this is not too broad and it's not too narrow. Meaning it's not, hi, I need help with quant, because that's not a study hall topic, that's like 100 of them. But this is also not a single problem. The median is a good example of a topic that is about right for a study hall. It's about the right degree of general for a session like this, and so it's a good thing. And then specific problems, if you're going to submit them, this is ideal. But if you are going to submit specific problems, you have to tie those into a more general question. So otherwise, if it's just a specific problem, then please just post it on the forum. That's what that's for. But if you have a topic more generally to ask about, then that's a good submission. So like, I can't decide between these items. Could you present some material on other things or this or that type of modifier? So To the person who's saying you can't see text, it's because it's still loading. There's some sort of problem with your connection. Like I'm seeing an icon that's basically telling me that you're having issues with your whiteboard and your connection. So that's what's going on there. Okay. Finally, don't forget, please do not submit official guide problems. We can't use them. And please don't give us a problem with no source. If you use a problem, you gotta tell us where it's from, because otherwise we can't use it. And this includes problems that are from Manhattan GMAT materials. I mean, we don't know all of our own company's problems because there are like 3,000 of them. So even if you took a problem from the MGMAT test, you still have to tell us, please, that that's the source. Because if you give us a problem that doesn't have a source, we can't use it. Any questions about the rules, about the types of problems that you should submit or not submit? If you understand, then go ahead and give me a smiley face icon. The smiley face icon is, there's an icon that you can click. Let me show you where that is. There's an icon that you can click that's located here underneath your name. If you, that'll show up. I mean, it's not a text box thing. It's, yeah, some of you guys are finding it. The emoticons that are located here are things that will just show up temporarily and then go away. Someone says, what do you mean by official guide problems? The official guide is the book that GMAT publishes. So I mean, if you're very new to this game, maybe you don't know those books yet or whatever, but we're talking about the GMAT official guide to the test. Also, by the way, if you are brand new to this, then you might have some trouble following today's lesson because topic is data sufficiency, and we do expect that people watching this are already familiar with how data sufficiency works on a very basic level. So if you don't know how that works, then today's session is not going to make a lot of sense to you until you have learned those basics. So, all right. Let's go ahead and get started with one more thing. Again, we say this each time, but we have an archive right now that has approximately 70 recordings in it. That's a lot of recordings. So what that means is that if you have a very generic kind of topic, then it's probably in there already. So what you should do before you post a topic is check the archive and see if you can find it. If you can, then please watch the video that has your topic in it. If you can't find it in the archive, then please go ahead and post it. But if you can, watch the video that contains it first. And then if you still have some sort of general enough question about that topic after you have checked the archive, then good to go. Yeah, there's a lot of sessions. I mean, we're not giving away the core material of the course. So the class is still something that people should buy. But this is meant to be a supplemental resource. But it is a good resource, we do think. That's why we've continued it for so long. All right, any questions about the rules? Smiley face, remember where to find the smiley face if you guys understand. All right, let's go ahead and move on. So once more, in case any of you are newly arrived here, this is the topic of the day. Data sufficiency, in particular testing cases. Also, a couple of things. First of all, here, when we give you multiple choice questions, here is where to select your answer. So you'll find an A-looking thing under your name. And that is where you pick your answers to multiple choice questions once they show up. So a couple of you are picking answers already. You're not going to be able to see each other's answers, but please select multiple choice answers here. Please do not, someone's clicking on the raise hand button. Please don't click that. It makes a bell sound that I think everybody hears and it's sort of disruptive. Please, whatever you do, please do not write your multiple choice answers in the in the chat box. And then please don't click more than once, because if you click the same answer twice in a row, then it'll erase the first answer that you pick. If you, people who can't find this thing, go find your own name on the left, and it'll be right under your name. Should be directly there. I mean, if you have a Windows computer, it might look ever so slightly different than what I have here, but if you, and yours will be in English and mine's not, but it should be right under your name on the left. So make sure you guys can find it. All right. Also, the other disclaimer here is that all of the problems on today's lesson, except for one of them, if we get to that one, I'll tell you which one it is. But all of today's problems are from the official GMATprep software, unless otherwise indicated. So that's copyright GMAT. I mean, we're allowed to distribute and use those problems because they are free. But that is, we still have to tell you that it's copyright GMAT. What we cannot do is use the official guide problems because those are not free. I mean, those are actually a profit tool for GMAT. But GMATprep we're allowed to use because they are free software questions. If you lost your multiple choice tab, I mean, you can also go to, you should be able to go to the tabs on top. And there, I mean, it's going to be kind of annoying for you to have to do this, but I think you should also be able to the person who asked this question. Yeah, you can do that. Tools, and then go to polling. And then you can go to respond. I mean, this is not as great as just being able to click something, but it'll still work. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Also, it is expected that you guys understand what the answer choices are to data sufficiency. I can go ahead and throw them under the questions. But if you don't understand what sufficient means or how data sufficiency works in general, then you should probably watch this video as a recording after you are more in control of that stuff. So here's the first problem. There's no problem there. There's the first problem. Okay, what I'm going to do is, here's the answer choices if you should actually need them. You really should know these by this point, but if you're unfamiliar, there they are. Remember, please indicate your answers in the polling area. There's the polling area. There you go. Okay, I will give you about maybe a minute and 45 seconds for this problem. Go for it. I can't make it bigger because it's already filling the entire width of the screen, but what you can do is make your screen bigger. By the way, there are 5 people who already have answers to this, and all 5 of you are wrong. The one who just answered it, you actually have the right answer. But the first 5 people to answer this question were all incorrect, and that's typical. Keep going. Okay, if you guys don't have an answer, please pick one. I'll give you about 10 or 15 more seconds. No, you can't. You can change your mind, but what you shouldn't do is pick the same letter twice in a row. Because if you can change your mind as many times as you want on these polls, but if you pick the same answer that's already up there, then what that'll do is it'll erase the answer that you just picked. So everybody pick something, please. And remember, this is an exam on which you cannot not answer. Like, you have to answer the questions. If you don't know that about the GMAT yet, you can't leave a problem blank. So please pick something. I'll give you 10 more seconds. Okay, here are your class results. Actually pretty good. Let me go ahead and erase the answer choices too, because you guys know what they are. Here are your results. So one thing about data sufficiency, I think you've probably heard me make this comment before if you've seen previous sessions of mine or whatever, but one thing that you should definitely know is that answers that seem too easy should be very, very suspicious. And on this problem, answer choice C probably seems a little bit too straightforward. I mean, this is the answer that 4 or 5 people picked after like 5 seconds, and it's not the right answer. So be careful here. But let's talk about what data sufficiency is on a very ground level here, and we'll see what this testing cases thing is all about. So, I mean, this looks like a stupid question, but let's make sure we get this on the ground. What exactly is data sufficiency? Like, what do sufficient and not sufficient mean? So make sure you guys remember this. Sufficient means that there is only one possible answer to the problem. And not sufficient or insufficient means that there are 2 or more possible answers. So I mean, this is a very basic fact, but this is still something that people struggle with even after sometimes lots of studying. Because what people do is they spend too much effort on the math in data sufficiency and not enough on understanding how this type of problem actually works. So you got to be careful about that. But make sure you're aware of this. Now, long story short here, why is this not just a random algebra problem? Like, why can't you just assign variables and do plain algebra? Like, in other words, let's try that. I mean, if you, let's say the 23-cent pencils, let's say you have X of these. And then let's say that you have of the 21-cent ones, let's say that you have Y number of those. I mean, if you write these as equations, I mean, you can, right? You can write X plus Y is 6 for the first one, and then you can write 23 cents times X plus 21 cents times Y equals 130 for the second one. You can write those. Those are legitimate. And if you just look at this as a random problem of algebra, then you might think right away that the answer is C. But what else is special about this problem? Like, why isn't this just an algebra problem? Like, what has to be true about X and Y? Chat box. Yeah, you got to have whole numbers. So, and I mean, one fact that you should know is that whole numbers, because when you do algebra, the problem with algebra in this kind of context is that algebra has no tool for distinguishing between whole numbers and not whole numbers. So here, X and y must be whole numbers. What this means, among other things, is you can't trust algebra. Because algebra doesn't, I mean, algebra will only tell you whether there's a unique solution or not if you are thinking strictly in terms of like all numbers being the same. So, and that's not true here because there's these privileged numbers that are whole numbers, and then all the other numbers are not as special as those. So what are we left with doing here? If you can't do algebra, then the only thing you really have left to do here is testing. So someone wrote, should we be practicing these things? Should we pick an answer within however long? I mean, when you first do the problem, yes, you should. When you review the problem later, like when you go over it after you've already done it, you can spend whatever time you need to understand. But when you first do a problem, yes, you should always do it with timed conditions. Okay, back to what we're doing here. So what you have to do in this problem, and what is a very useful technique on others, even if you don't have to do it, is testing cases. Talk about what that means. What testing cases means, because remember what sufficient and not sufficient are. Sufficient means you can only get a single possible answer to the question. Not sufficient means that you can get two or more answers to the question. So testing cases means you just come up with a list of possible cases. In other words, situations that satisfy the statements that you're dealing with. And then just answer for each case. Answer the question. Remember not to find other things, like the actual question that the data sufficiency problem is asking you. And then if there's only one answer to the question, then sufficient. And if there are two, if you actually get two different answers to the question, then not sufficient. So this is what testing cases is. It's not really like the world's most complicated method, but it is something that people don't do as often as they can. And especially on problems like this, on this problem, testing cases is actually what you have to do. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at statement 1. Statement 1 means that x plus y is 6, where x and y are whole numbers. So x plus y is 6. So let's just come up with cases for x and y. Well, let's find whole numbers that add up to 6. I mean, we could have 1 and 5. We could have 2 and 4. Do we have to keep going here? We do not have to keep going. Why not? Because we've got two answers. Notice what the question is. The question is, what is x? So, I mean, it's how many 23-cent pencils. So in terms of the x and y that we defined here, this question is, what is the value of x? So we just found two values for that variable. So two different answers not sufficient. By the way, this is the main advantage of the testing cases method, apart from the fact that you have to do it sometimes, is that it's very nice for proving that things are insufficient. Because like with algebra, when algebra does work, it's very nice for proving when things are sufficient. Because, you know, if you get everything to click, so to speak, then it's nice. But the problem with an algebraic approach is that it's not very good when it comes to proving that things are insufficient. So that's where testing cases really shines, because if you can just make two different answers come up, then you've got a statement that's insufficient. Now let's do this for statement 2 and let's see what happens. So let's try to come up with whole numbers that satisfy 23x and 21y. And then let's see if we can get that to happen. Okay, well, 23 times a whole number. I mean, what could 23x be in this problem? Like, what numbers could actually be 23x? Not 0, well, 0, 1, 2, 3 could be x, but okay, so 23 times x could be 23 times 0. It could be 23 times 1. It could be 23 times 2, 23 times 3, 23 times 4, 23 times 5. And then we're done because all the numbers bigger than that are too big. I mean, we have to have a total of 130 cents. So if you add 23 more cents here, you get more than that. Now, the sum has to be 130. So if 23x is supposed to be 0, then what would 21y have to be? 21y would have to be 130 because you're subtracting to figure that out. The problem here is that that doesn't work. Like 130 is not a multiple of 21 cents. So this case just doesn't count. So when you do case testing, make sure you know this. If a case actually doesn't even satisfy the requirements of the problem, then it's not a no or a yes to the question. It's not any kind of answer to the question. It just doesn't count. If 23x is trying to be 23 cents, then 21y would have to be 130 minus 23. Again, we have the same issue. 107 is not a multiple of 21 cents. If this is 46, this is 84. That works because that means you've got yourself 2 of these pencils and 4 of those. Are we done at this point? Yes or no, chat box. Are we finished? Okay, if you're saying that we are finished, then what that means is you actually don't really understand the basics of data sufficiency. And I mean, a lot of people are saying yes to this. So again, we have this problem of on data sufficiency, the problem is usually that people don't really understand the format of data sufficiency and don't ever come to understand it because they're too busy worrying about math. If you think we're done here, then you don't really understand these very basic meanings of sufficient and insufficient. I mean, remember that you have to keep going at this point because remember what these things mean. I mean, sufficient means there's only one answer. Not sufficient means that there are 2 or more. So I mean, the point is that the fact that you got one answer here doesn't mean anything, because you will always get one answer. Like there's not going to be a data sufficiency statement that simply doesn't work. So you're always going to get one case that works. This is not really an issue. So you have to keep going, because the question here is, can you get a second case? If you can, then that would become insufficient. And if you can't, then it's sufficient. So I mean, give me a smiley face thingy if you guys understand that. Because I mean, if you don't, you really aren't gonna ever get any better at this until you do. So you have to achieve that level of understanding. And a lot of people neglect that. A lot of people, even after months, are not super clear on what sufficient and insufficient mean. So we keep going. Let's see what happens. Well, 69 out of 130 leaves 61. 92 out of 130 leaves 38. 115 out of 130 leaves 15. So none of these are multiples of 21 cents over there. And so it turns out we're out of cases here. So there's only one possibility this time. And so what this means is this statement is sufficient by itself. So this is answer choice B. So notice that if you just took one look at this and said, oh, two equations, two unknowns, so I pick C, the lesson you got to learn there is that problems on data sufficiency are not that easy. Like if you just look at this and are like, oh, hey, I think I can just throw those together and get a solution, you got to look at it more than that. You got to investigate further. So, I mean, the point there is don't jump to conclusions in data sufficiency. All right, any questions? Would you recommend going through this whole process for such questions? What do you mean by such questions? It depends on what such questions are. Yeah, I guess I don't really understand what you're asking here. I'm sorry. Bob, it's understood that you know the grid already and that you know what the answer choices mean. So no, we're not going to go over that. If you don't know what the answer choices are, then there are resources that you can consult for that. No, Max, that doesn't work. Let me post that on another page. But the whole thing with whole numbers, I mean, with whole numbers, it's really not a joke, guys. With whole numbers, you really have to test cases. So, like, I mean, some people are very persistent about trying to find an algebra solution to this. It's not going to happen. There's not going to be an easy algebra way to handle this. This doesn't work. For instance, if you have, let's say that x and y are whole numbers, then if I give you these two equations, if I tell you that 5x plus 7y has to equal 47, then this actually has two different solutions. But if I tell you that 5x plus 8 plus 7y is 48, then as it turns out, that only has one solution. So, I mean, in the first one, your solutions can be, you can have x is 8, y is 1, or you can have x is 1 and y is 6. But in the second one, the only solution that works is 4 and 4. So, I mean, you can't really avoid doing this in a problem like this one. And I mean, you shouldn't be trying to. You should be trying to learn as many approaches as you can. But there's not going to be a simple algebraic workaround here. And I mean, the point is that, how do I know these equations? These equations I came up with before because people try to do this all the time. Like people try to, oh, I don't want to test cases. Let me try to invent algebra that'll do this. What you guys have to understand is that the reason these problems are here is because you cannot solve all of them with algebra. Like that's actually the point of these questions. So make sure you know that. And I mean, if you're trying to use algebra, then you're falling right into the traps that they're setting for you. Like that's what they're doing. They want to make sure that you can think in ways that are not just algebra rules. That's the only reason problems like this are even there. So, you know, make sure you are not too rigid in your thought process. So, but back to the thing here, basic idea of testing cases. You come up with cases. If you get more than one thing to happen, then that's insufficient. And if you get only one thing to happen, then that's sufficient. So like, what's the other thing here? Like what result are you actually trying to get here? Are you trying to get sufficient here, or are you trying to get not sufficient? What do you guys think? When you test cases, are you trying to prove the statement sufficient, or are you trying to prove it not sufficient? It's not really both. What you're trying to do is when you test cases, you try to prove not sufficient. Because think about how testing cases works, right? Like you test a bunch of cases, and if you actually get two answers, then you have not sufficient. I mean, you can't really prove sufficient except by running out of stuff. So in other words, you're trying to get two different results. And like, you can't really prove sufficient except by running out of cases and not getting that. So when you test cases, you are trying to get basically a second answer. And if you fail to get that, if you fail to get a second answer, then sufficient. But you're not directly trying to prove it. Leo, no, the short answer is that's incorrect, because if the first statement says there's 6 pencils, the second statement doesn't have to make 6 pencils. So it can use time, but it's a technique that it doesn't use that much time. I mean, sort of mind-reading moment here. I'm going to play psychologist for a second, but a lot of people look at this and say, oh, that'll take too much time. That's probably not really what's going on in your head if you're saying that. If people look at this and their reaction is, oh, that'll take too much time, what they're probably really thinking is, oh my gosh, I don't want to do that because I'm not comfortable with it, so I'm going to use time as an excuse. Like, that's what's actually going on there. Because this doesn't really take that long. I mean, if I wasn't talking through this, this would probably take a maximum of 20 or 30 seconds. You know, if you're kind of slow at arithmetic, it might take a little bit longer, but this is not a long process. And on problems where you can test cases, it's not going to be. So if people are like, oh my gosh, that's going to take too long, what that really means is I don't want to do it because it's outside my comfort zone. And if that's what's going on, you got to fix that, because the point of this test is to require a diversity of approaches. So in this case, yes, this is the only way you can solve the problem. And there are problems that do that. difficulty levels, if you're a student, are irrelevant, so it doesn't really matter what the difficulty level is. Like, it's not something you should ever be thinking about. You should just solve the problems, and that's that. Make sure you guys are not trying to think about numerical difficulty levels, because you're not ever going to know what those are, so you can't strategize around those. Okay, let's move on to another problem. How about, okay, I know we put difficulty levels in our tests and stuff. Let me tell you a secret. The reason we do that is because, unfortunately, we sell more tests that way. But you really shouldn't be thinking about the difficulty levels. There's a lot of people out there who want to buy stuff that has difficulty levels in it. So, and it is a parameter that exists. It is a thing. But as a student, you can't plan any sort of strategy around that. So make sure you don't. It is kind of a thing, right? Because there are things that people should want, and there are things that they do want, and they're not really the same. But anyway, back to a problem. Try this. Again, remember where the polling answers are located. So please don't answer in the text box. And there you go. All right, give it a shot. Here's the timer. Go for it. Okay, if you don't have an answer to this, please pick one in the next 15 or 20 seconds. Thanks. All right, let's chat about this here. Here are your responses. So it looks like we have a lot of C's and E's and then fewer of the other choices. But let's take a look. So remember what's going on here. M is a positive odd integer. Then M is divisible by how many positive prime numbers. And the thing that you should notice about this problem is that there are not very many cases here. There's not a lot of those. There's only 14 odd integers between 2 and 30. So, if you have a problem, like you have a data sufficiency problem with few cases, generally testing cases is often the safest approach. Because the thing with testing cases is that there's no weird subtleties to it. There's no things that can trip you up, and there's no little exceptions to rules and stuff, because there's not really rules. There's just, okay, I'm going to throw this stuff in there and see what falls out. So you just have to do it and see if it happens. It's the same thing. It's the same thing that's the beauty of this problem right here, is that you don't have to know why this only gives you one solution. It just does. It's like this gentleman here was asking about, is there all this stuff with least common multiple and blah, 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 and whatever. Not really. Number one, there's not really rules like that in the first place. But also, number two, you just don't have to think about it. That's the advantage of doing this. With a testing cases approach, you don't need to use any theory at all. You just have to throw stuff in there and see what falls out. Kind of nice. So let's look at this problem. So M has to be one of these numbers. And remember, don't forget to answer the question. Okay, the question is not what is M. The question is this. M is divisible by how many different primes? So whatever you do, don't forget to answer the actual question that is the question. It's where a lot of people go wrong. So the actual question. A lot of people don't. You'll see. So, okay, m is not divisible by 3. Well, let's just look at all the possible cases. Probably best way to do it is just to list them all and then cross out the ones that are multiples of 3. So here's all of your odd integers in that range. And then just cross out the ones that are multiples of 3. Those are multiples of 3. So we're left with those numbers that are listed there. So the question, again, make sure you answer the question. The question is how many different prime factors? So, well, 5 only has 5, so that's only one prime factor. 7 only has one prime factor. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and 1. Oh, look what happened. This is sufficient. Like, I only got one answer to the question. Notice even with 25, still only one prime factor because the question specifically says how many different prime numbers. So you have to read the question carefully here, but 5 and 5 are not different prime numbers. So even with 25, it's still 1. So I mean, very few of you picked this statement is sufficient. Most of you picked things like C and E. And what that means, especially if you picked E, what that means is that you're probably not answering the actual question in the problem. Like if you picked E, you're probably just trying to find M as a number. And the problem there is that you don't want M as a number. I mean, you want the answer to this question. So there's how is this sufficient when the question is asking for how many? How many means how many primes are there? So, I mean, every one of the numbers in this list just has a single prime factor. So for each of these cases, the answer to the question is 1. We already addressed the issue of repeated because it says how many different prime factors. So it says different. So if you have 5 and 5 as your prime factors, that is only one prime factor. It's not two different ones. What if it was more than one? If you could get another answer, then that would make it insufficient. So let's look at that for the second statement. So statement 2, let's look at all possible cases again, write them out. So here's all of those odd numbers that we're considering. And then we cross out the ones that are multiples of 5. So we don't want 5, we don't want 15, and we don't want 25. And then the question that we're actually trying to answer here is how many different prime factors. So 3 only has one prime factor. Remember, we're trying to prove insufficient. So now that we only have one prime factor here, we're looking for a different number of prime factors. So we can skip ahead of all these other numbers and go up to a number that has more than one. Like, okay, here's 21. 21 is 3 times 7. So that has 2 different prime factors. So this is actually two different answers to the question. So this is not sufficient. Versus in this statement up here, you got a lot of cases, but you only had one answer over and over and over again, and it was impossible to get another answer. Mitch, you got to ask a more specific question than that. We're trying to answer this. This is the data sufficiency question. We're trying to say how many prime factors does M have? So we're just answering that question for each value of M. So if you get different answers to this question, then not sufficient. If you get the same answer to this question over and over again, then sufficient. And I mean, again, this is the problem with a lot of people. I mean, it's not an uncommon problem, is that people just don't really figure out what sufficient and insufficient mean, or they just don't pay attention to the question. I mean, this is really what data sufficiency is more than anything else. It's a test of can you pay attention. It's a test of can you focus. It's a test of do you understand what we are asking and what we are not asking. It's not at all a test of math. I mean, math is the subject material, but on a very basic sort of level. So the overall answer to this question is going to be A. So most of you guys seem to struggle with this. There's very few A's. I mean, 4 out of like 56 people. So there you go. Okay. I see soccer and footballs in your question there. PC, that won't ever happen because that if you only get one answer out of each statement, it'll be the same. Nora, I can't repeat everything that I just said. If you have a more specific question, please ask it. Otherwise, maybe check out the video recording later. But why is A the answer would be everything we just said. I only got one answer. It means that my answer was 1 every single time. So that's sufficient. I got a single answer over and over and over and over and over again. So that's what happened. I mean, I get more than 1 M, but it doesn't matter. Nora, answer the question for each one. I mean, we've talked about the case of 25 here several times already, but the question is how many prime numbers are there that go into it? If you're dealing with 25, the only prime factor is 5. So, I mean, it is 5 times 5, but that's a single prime factor. That's only 1 prime. So, the answer to this question is still 1. I mean, you got to focus, right? This is a big thing. It's actually probably the single most common reason why people get data sufficiency problems incorrect is because they don't focus on the question. So, how many primes can you find? In the case of 25, how many primes? Just 1, just 5. 5 is the only prime. All right, cool. All right, so we're on the same page. Let's take a look at another problem. Let's say, how about this one? Give you guys a timer. Here's a timer. Go for it. Remember where to pick your answers, please. Thanks. All right, make sure you guys all pick an answer here. There's only, I think, a total of about 35 answers so far, and there are 57 people here. So that means a lot of you haven't answered the question yet. So please do so. I'll give you about 15, 20 more seconds to do that. But if you have to make a guess, please make one. Okay, let's talk about it. Circle C and line K. Here are the answers that you guys picked. So, we got people kind of all over the place on this one. But let's take a look. If circle C is centered at the origin and has radius 1, then does line K intersect circle C? And then the other thing you've got to know here is what generally happens with problems about coordinate geometry. So a lot of people think that whenever they see coordinate geometry that they're going to be dealing with this, y equals mx plus b equations type of stuff. And the fact is that actually relatively few problems in coordinate geometry deal with that kind of algebra. It turns out that coordinate geometry is one of those problem types that, for the most part, they put on the test because you don't really use algebra very much at all. So what you do use is what stuff looks like. So a very important fact about coordinate geometry is that most of the problems you're going to see are not algebraic. So most coordinate problems, especially data sufficiency, are not about algebra. Instead, most of them are about what stuff looks like. So should we make a diagram, Suvik? Absolutely, yes, we should. So when you think about coordinate geometry, don't think first about y equals mx plus b. The first thing you should think about when you see coordinate geometry is what does this look like if I draw it? So let's take a look. And also, make sure you understand what's going on. Circle C here is fixed in the middle of the plane. So that's always going to look the same. So we know at least that we're dealing with something that looks like this. So that's the same every time. So you should draw a picture of that sort. That's going to be 1, negative 1, 1, negative 1. So this we've got over and over and over again. So let me graphic that. All right. So this is the situation that we're dealing with, and then we need to put a line on there called K. So if circle C is centered at the origin and has radius 1, so does line K intersect the circle? So if you are testing cases, what are you trying to make happen? See if someone can tell me. Like what two things are you trying to make happen here if you're testing cases? Remember, you're trying for insufficient. So what does that mean, though? Like, what are you trying to do? There you go. I mean, everybody who typed before Mitch is kind of missing the point here. So make sure you guys, again, make sure you guys understand what the task is. The task is to get 2 different answers to the problem. The problem is, does line K intersect the circle? So if it does intersect the circle, then that would be a yes to the question. And if it doesn't, then that would be a no to the question. I mean, that's what you're doing, right? You're trying to prove that there are 2 different answers. If you fail to find 2 different answers, then you just say, okay, I give up, and I'm going to pick sufficient. But you're trying to get 2 different things to happen. If you have a yes-no question, the only way you can get 2 different things to happen is by getting a yes once and by getting a no once. So let's try that. The x-intercept of line K is greater than 1. So that just means the x-intercept is on the right-hand side somewhere. So statement 1 just tells us that our x-intercept is somewhere over there. It is somewhere in the purple zone. Okay. So, well, remember what we're trying for. We're trying to intersect the circle, and we're trying to not intersect the circle. So that's not that hard to do. Here's a line that has an x-intercept over there that does intersect the circle. And so that's a yes to the question, because it does intersect the circle. And then here's a line that would be a no to that question if you had like a line here. So there's your cases. I got a yes, I got a no. So this is not sufficient. Any questions about that? Okay. Statement 2. Here's the circle situation thingy again. Make sure you know what a line with slope -1/10 looks like. If you see the slope has this value, that looks like a downward sloping line. Specifically, it's downward sloping exactly such that if you go down by 1 unit, then you would go over by 10 units. It's the whole rise over run thing. Yeah, 1 down, 10 to the right. Exactly. So in other words, the line is at like a fixed angle. That's what happens when you have a slope. But again, make sure you know what these things look like. So where can we put that? Well, you can put it anywhere as long as you give it that slope. So this could be a no if it's over there. Or it could be a yes. So still insufficient. That's got the right slope and doesn't intersect. And this one has the right slope and does intersect the circle. So that's not sufficient either. So notice statement 1 wasn't sufficient. Statement 2 is not sufficient either. So what we have to do now is do it together. The x-intercept means where does it hit the x-axis? Yeah. Okay, so here's together. Let's try to use both statements together. Let's see what happens. statements together. So again, here's your grid. And we need to have an x-intercept that's over here somewhere in the pink zone. And then we still have to have the line with a slope like that, like this one that we made in the last problem. So, well, it's not a problem, right? So here's a line with that slope that doesn't hit the circle, and that has an x-intercept over there. And I mean, the exact distances here are not an issue. Like, if you don't see why this misses the circle, then just imagine moving it over like 1,000,000 units in this direction. So you can definitely miss the circle. And you can also hit the circle. So you still get a yes, and you still get a no. But you have to know what the goal is. You have to know what it is that you're actually trying to do in the first place. Because if you don't, then this is going to be awfully hard. So this one is a yes because it intersects the circle. And this one's a no. Doesn't intersect the circle. TPG is not the length of the line. It's a slope of -1/10. It's the basic definition of what slope means. If you don't know what slopes look like, you should check out our strategy guide in geometry, or you should check out, I think it's also briefly mentioned in the Foundations of Math book, but that's where you would go for that information, is to one of those two resources. But it's the slope of the line. I don't really know what you are asking me, Abhishek. If you're asking me whether there's an algebraic solution, the answer is there probably is one, and you really don't want to do it. I mean, imagine trying to find, like, if you move this line around, there's going to be some, like here, there's going to be some tangent place where it, like, exactly stops hitting the circle, like where it only touches it at one point, and finding that is really not going to be that easy. So, but the point is, asking for that is kind of missing the point of coordinate geometry problems on the GMAT entirely. Like, remember, the reason that these problems are on here, for the most part, is for you to visualize stuff. So, plus C could be a non-integer. C is a circle. C is not a number. Maybe you're talking about a different problem or something. But nothing called C in this problem is a number. But yeah, the point of coordinate geometry on the GMAT is, most of it is about what does this look like. And if you start trying to do crazy algebra all the time, then some problems are going to give you a very hard time. How about a line with a slope -10/3? The line with slope -10/3 would go down. It would go down, and it would go down 10 for every 3. So it would look something like this, roughly. So -10/3. Okay, if you need any more help on slopes, please consult those resources, the strategy guide, the Foundations book, etc., etc. All right, let's move on to another problem about in case anybody is lost, this thing was a response to this question right here. Okay. Yeah, the problem we just did is E, because it's still, even if you use both statements together, you still can't solve the problem. So it's still insufficient with the two statements. Okay, let's move on. I got time to do one more here. So let's look at this problem. Let's look at another coordinate geometry one. All right, good times for everybody. This will be the last problem that we have today. I will give you a timer so that you can have loads and loads of fun. Here you go. Okay, most of you, actually about half of you, still don't have answers yet. So take another minute or so if you have to. But go ahead and answer, please. Okay, we still have a lot of non-answers to this, so please go ahead and select something if you can. Thank you. Okay, here are your answers to the poll. Again, we're sort of all over the place here, but let's take a look. What do we definitely have? We definitely have a coordinate grid. We're sort of running short on time here, so let's make it fast. We have a coordinate grid. That's a bad coordinate grid. Let's try that again. We have a coordinate grid where two things intersect at 4, 3. And again, this is more a thing about it's more a thing about appearances than about algebra. So this is the point 4, 3, and we have to make the lines actually intersect at this point. So 4, 3. Is the product of the slopes negative? So what we're trying to do is we want to make this we want to make this, we want to try to make two different answers to this question. So we want positive and negative, if possible, or positive, or we want not negative and negative. So let's try, remember it's the product of the slopes, so we need to think about whether these things are positive or negative slopes. So let me take a picture of that graphic, and then we're good. Okay. So let's look at statement 1. The product of the x-intercept is positive. So this means either you have two positive x-intercepts or you have two negative ones. Or two negative x-intercepts. So let's look at that and see if we can get that to happen here. So if we have two positive x-intercepts, then, well, we can get a positive x-intercept means your line has to hit somewhere here. So two positive x-intercept or two negative ones. If we're looking at the case of two positive x-intercepts, then we need to try for both of these products. If we make one line like this and another line like that, then let me make it a different color, because otherwise it looks like we've got three lines here. If we make these two lines, then those have a positive and a negative slope. So that's a negative product. Positive times negative is negative. But then if we just move the other x-intercept over a little bit, like if we make one line here and another line here, then that's positive times positive. So we got two different answers to this. So is the product of their slopes negative? Could be yes, could be no. So this is not sufficient. Any questions, please type them in the text box. Otherwise, we will move on to the second statement. Give me about 5 seconds here. The system is doing something weird. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at statement 2. For statement 1, shouldn't the x-intercepts be less than 0? We don't have to. Okay, let's talk about that again. You can have, why would you have to have negative x-intercepts? Remember that both, oh, okay, I see where you guys are going with this. Remember that these are both possibilities, right? I mean, a couple of you guys are basically asking this question. We haven't tested negative intercepts yet because we don't have to, right? Like we already got a yes answer and a no answer just from considering, just by considering two positive intercepts. I mean, if we had to, we would go there. But it's one of those things that you don't even need to bother. So like a few of you seem to be unclear on that. I mean, these are both possibilities that we could use both of them if we needed to, but we don't have to. Like just by considering two positive intercepts, like this is two positive intercepts, and it gives a yes, and this is two positive intercepts, and it gives a no. So I mean, just by using that one case, we already got yes and no. So we don't need to bother. I hope that clears things up. There are a few of you asking about that. Okay, so statement 2 is very, very similar. So we can do this in kind of a hurry. We do kind of have to be in a hurry at this point. Okay, statement 2, the product of the y-intercept is negative. So this means that you have one positive y-intercept and one negative y-intercept. So you can, I mean, your negative y-intercept is definitely going to slope upward because you have to go from a negative to a positive y value. But this is still not sufficient because you have to have a positive y-intercept. And you can make that happen either like this or like this. Suvik, no, you can't. You cannot make assumptions really about anything. The whole point of data sufficiency is to kill you if you make assumptions. Like if you, if I change the point 4.3 to like 4.0, then statement 2 is sufficient. Make sure you can figure out why. So the short answer is, can't we assume anything? If you have to ask a question like that, that's always a bad idea. Do not assume things. The whole point of data sufficiency is to kind of destroy you if you do assume things. So, okay. This is positive times positive is positive, so that's a no to the question. And this is positive times negative equals negative, so that's a yes to the question. So this is also not sufficient. So we're down to C versus E. And don't forget what it is that you're trying to do here. So you're trying to make this happen both ways. So if you have, notice what this means now. This means you got to have one positive y-intercept, and you have to have one negative y-intercept. And notice the negative y-intercept is special here because it has to go through the x-axis like that. So the thing with your negative y-intercept is that that line is automatically going to have a positive x-intercept, because if it doesn't, you can't hit that 0.43. So this line must have a positive x-intercept. It's easy to see that in the picture. It's very hard without that. Because like to get from down here to up here, you have to cross through the x-axis. That's basically the idea. So what that means if you have these statements, remember now we're using the statements together. The product of the x-intercept is positive. Well, this one's got to have a positive x-intercept. So the other remaining line, to make statement 1 true, this line must also have a positive x-intercept. So that means you've got a positive y and a positive x-intercept. That means your line slopes downward. So it means that your line has to look, I mean, it could look like this, or it could look like this, or it could look like that, or whatever else. But if you have a positive y-intercept and a positive x-intercept, then you have a negative slope. That's the only way that can happen. So this is enough to answer the question, because the blue line, the line that we're writing about in blue text here, must have a negative y-intercept and positive x-intercept. So that's a positive slope. And then the line that we're talking about in purple must have positive y-intercept and negative x-intercept. So that's a negative, or sorry, that's supposed to say positive. Let's fix that. So, I mean, so you can test all the cases you want here, but you're going to get a negatively sloping line and a positively sloping line you're going to have that in every possible case. So in all cases here, it's positive times negative equals negative. So that's sufficient. The answer is C. Again, people who are saying, oh, it takes quite a few minutes, this one, I'm telling you, that's still, oh, I don't want to do it, I'm not comfortable with it. I can guarantee you that's what's really happening there. I mean, the only reason this took so long to do is because I had to draw things on an awkward online classroom, and I had to talk about them while I was doing it. I mean, if you guys are doing this on your own exam with a pen and that yellow pad, and you're not talking to anybody, then this really doesn't take that much time at all. I mean, it doesn't take any more time than anything else does. I mean, again, if you're looking at something and being like, oh, I'm afraid to do that because I think it'll take too long, I really urge you to look deeper into what you're saying and see if you're actually just like, oh, I don't like this. So remember about difficulty level, it's not worth thinking about, so it doesn't matter. I mean, just make sure that you learn what you have to learn that does matter. Like, what does sufficient mean? What does insufficient mean? Focus on the question, stuff like that. Don't preoccupy yourself with stuff like difficulty level because it just doesn't matter. Coordinate geometry, yeah, there's 2 entire sessions on. So what we're going to do next time is more of this data sufficiency case testing stuff. It's not going to be more geometry though. So next time, more testing cases in data sufficiency, not necessarily geometry. There's already 2 archived sessions on data sufficiency coordinate geometry, so please go find those. Alexi, we already talked about that. The answer is it doesn't matter. The answer is that's not something that will help you to think about. So you shouldn't care. Topics beforehand, no, we don't, because I don't know what the topic is until half an hour before the session. But this time you do know what the topic is because it'll be more of this. Abhishek, this is not the time or the place. Please post it on the forum. Thank you. All right. Do I offer personal tutoring? Okay. I do tutoring through Manhattan GMAT. I have a wait list right now for like a month or so, but yes, if you are interested, here's my email address. You can email me for more information. Please, this should be kind of common sense, but do not submit GMAT questions to this email address. I cannot answer questions about the GMAT in private email. Just like any other professional cannot. I mean, if you watched a video with a lawyer on it, you would not suddenly email the lawyer and ask for free legal advice. So please don't do the same with the GMAT. So, okay, if you are interested in doing direct business with me or Manhattan GMAT, this is the email address. Please, please just email this address if you. This was kind of slow, but because it's on the online thing, I mean, whenever anybody's got a question, I try to answer it. So. In a class, yeah, in a live class, it would be a lot faster than this, if that makes you feel better about stuff. Okay, we got to go here. I'm going to cut off the recording at this point. Thank you for attending.